We're back out here once again, and today we're talking about an exceptional summertime bait that often goes overlooked, even though it's perfect for those summertime conditions. What is it? Well, stick around and we're going to talk all about it. Oh, there we go. Ooh, that's a nice one. On the spinner bait. Come on, buddy. Ooh, you're not getting down in that gunk. Out of the gunk. There we go. That's a big bass, kids. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And you know, every year, every summer, we hit that spot where bass fishing turns into a real grind. For me, there is a certain marker, a certain delineation, and it's at the point when those bass, they stop rummaging around and stop scrounging around for pretty much anything they can find and start chasing balls of bait almost exclusively. And the reason for that is, well, we've got the prey species, they've had their spawn, their fry have hatched, and we've got immense clouds of those fry in bait balls that they just are an easy meal for those bass. They gorge themselves on those young of the year without having to expend a whole lot of energy. And we've talked about before that makes a great survival tactic. Now, there are ways we can combat that. There are ways we can adjust our fishing technique. A lot of lipless crankbaits, square bills, deep divers, what have you, that's a popular way to attack that moving bait tactic. But I use something a little bit different. It's something I keep in my back pocket. It's an old school bait. It's something that I consider more of a manual bait than an automatic. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, with a square bill or a deep diver or a lipless, you actually don't have so much control of the depth on that bait, on that particular bait that you're using. It's pretty much automatic. The depth that you choose is the one that that bait is designed for, and you can make some adjustments with your gear, some line, some reel speed and whatnot to vary that a little bit, but for the most part, you're locked in what you have. A manual bait is something that you have to monitor yourself. You monitor the depth, you monitor the speed, you monitor how that bait looks in the water simply by how you work it. It's a little bit more old school. And a lot of times it gives me the freedom to work that bait how I want to, which is exactly what I want to do. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the good old spinnerbait, an overlooked old school bait that you're not seeing a lot of guys use during the summertime. And I don't know why. These are great in the spring, these are great in the fall, and guess what? They're also great in the summertime because, as we've said before, this is the original A rig. This is the original Alabama rig that impersonates a small school of bait fish. And right now, that's exactly what you want to do. Something like this can really elicit those strong strikes. And the biggest fish that I caught this year was on a spinnerbait, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But this is what I'm starting out with. This is a 3/8 ounce spinnerbait. It's a regular Googan Zinger. Whatever brand is fine. You know, Booyah is good. Strike King is good. A lot of guys like to go with War Eagle or Berkley. That's all fine. But what I'm saying is I usually start out with a 3/8 ounce or a 1/2 ounce spinnerbait. I've got a tandem blade here with the Colorado blade and the Willow blade. This is all chrome. A lot of times I'll go without even using a trailer. I'll just go like this. Now, some guys like to put a stinger hook or a trailer hook on here. I'm not a huge fan of that. I don't really see where it makes much of a difference other than the fact that it's going to grab more grass for me. And a spinnerbait is a pretty weedless setup. These things come through the grass fairly good. Now, it's not going to come through the super uber thick milfoil and hydrilla, but you can still bring it across the tops of that, hit that top of that vegetation, and it'll work okay. Again, this is going to be my starting point. This is where I'm going to start off with just a regular white spinnerbait because I want to impersonate those shiner, impersonate that shad, and see what those bass are doing. See what type of mood that those bass are in based on the conditions. If I got a clear sky, I've got pretty clear water, again, this is where I'm going to be starting at. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be switching things up a little bit based on the conditions. If I've got bluebird sky, if I've got maybe just a little bit less chop on the water, and we're going to say pretty good visibility, we're going to say pretty clear visibility, I'm going to go with something like this. This is a Strike King spinnerbait, but this has got that painted blade on it, and I really like these. I feel like that gives this bait just a little bit more drawing power. This is the actual spinnerbait that I used to catch the biggest fish I've caught out of the big lake this year. And the thing about the big lake is it is in a transitional mode. Years ago, used to be able to catch 7-8 pound bass all the time, but it was overfished. It was fished to the point where you couldn't catch anything there for years. 5 years ago, they came up with what they call their 5-year plan, and they restocked it and they redid the lake, and they seeded it with a whole bunch of Florida strain bass. Now, a lot of those bass are still relatively small. That's why pound and a quarter, pound and a half is going to be about your average size. Although some of those old lunkers are still in there, and every once in a while you can snag into one. And that's what this guy did here. That bass was north of 4 pounds. I don't remember exactly how much it was, but it was the biggest fish that I had caught so far this year at the big lake. And I did it with this spinnerbait because those big bass, they're the ones have learned use less energy, get more food. And if they see something that's going to be a nice meal for them that they can just reach out and get, that's what they're going for. So that's why that works as well. Now, if we've got water that's going to be stained, if we've got some really murky, muddy water, and for the big lake, anything considered pretty much less than 8 foot of visibility, that's going to be stained. That's how clear the water is most of the time. But if we've got some pretty murky water, we've got something that's got some real good heavy stain to it, then I'm going to be going to something like this. I got the single Colorado blade, I've got the dark skirt, even during the daytime, although a lot of guys will use these at night. Regardless of water clarity, they'll use these at night. Well, because if there's no sun, it doesn't matter if the water's murky or clear, does it? It's always going to be dark. So a Colorado blade is going to have a lot of thump with it. Now, I'm not using a double Colorado blade, and I don't change my blades up all that often because I'm not any good at it. Usually I end up boogering up the wire, and so I just rather, just leave things as they are. So for the most part, I'm using a single Colorado blade. I get that extra bit of thump, and I find it works exceptionally well for me. Another way I'll do it, if, maybe there's not so much stain, but we've got a little bit of stain, we've got some cloud cover, is I'll go with something like this chartreuse color, which to a bass is going to look very, very white, and maybe a little bit smaller Colorado blade. Now, I like this as a trailer. This is just a Rage grub, but there's something that I do with these is I put them on here like this, perpendicular, and I don't split the tail. I leave that tail connected like that. That's my own little trick. That's my own little secret sauce, because that turns that into a giant fin, and it just comes through the water and it looks like it's undulating like a fish. Now, a lot of times if I'm working a spinnerbait and I notice those bass are chasing more bluegill fry, more of the smaller bluegill, I'll go with something like this. I like that double gold willow leaf. I like that more subtle presentation, especially in clear water, especially on a sunny day. I'll go with a trailer or without a trailer. If I'm putting a trailer on something like this, I'll usually go with a darker trailer. Again, a swim bait is fine, or I will use a Rage grub or something of that nature. But it's usually going to be, sometimes I'll go green pumpkin, but a lot of times I'll go black blue flake, and I find I can get some really amazing strikes doing that. Again, just keeping it simple. Now, the trailers that I use, well, obviously you're going to use something like a good old Keitech. A Keitech can be an amazing trailer. It's like it was made for a spinnerbait, and it's going to be a favorite of many anglers. But there's a little trick that I like to do. There's something that I like to do to change things up, and that's these old H&H Cocahoe little saltwater swim baits. You see they've got that chartreuse tail, and they've got a really white body. These things make great spinnerbait trailers, and I know a lot of the older guys right now are getting pretty fussed at me because this is a trick we've had in our back pocket for a few years. But if you ever get a chance to try one of those on your spinnerbait, do it. And when I talked about more of a manual thing, Well, the retrieves that I'm doing, the things that I'm doing, it all depends on how I want to work that bait. Most of the time, I'm working that spinner bait pretty slowly because the more I work it, the faster I work it, the higher in the water column it's going to go. That's the difference between a crankbait and a spinnerbait. Is with a spinnerbait, you're going to be working that bait a lot more manually. How that bait reacts in the water has a lot more to do with how you are working it rather than the setup that you have. I can go very, very slow and I can keep that bait right above the bottom, especially with something like a half ounce. I can get that nice and low, or I can work it faster, bring it up a little bit in the water column, and try to get those suspending bass to react. A heavier spinnerbait is going to obviously work lower in the water column. But if I'm going after those lunkers, if I'm going after those really, really huge girls, well, that's when I push this guy out of my back pocket. This guy right here, this is 1.5 ounces. This is technically a musky spinnerbait, but I've had this thing for a few years and it's looking a little bit worse for wear. It's got the old buck tail. I don't ever work a trailer with this. I leave this as it is. But if I want to get that super deep water, if I'm going to slow roll, say in 15, 20, 25 feet of water, that's when I pull this guy out. And this guy, it's kind of funny because you would say, well, this is the one that you use to get those big monsters. And when I am fishing this in the summertime, it is to get those big monsters. But I've caught a lot of dinks with it too, which is kind of funny. You would see those bass that are smaller than the lure and they bite this as well. But this, don't rule out a bigger spinnerbait, a musky or northern pike spinnerbait on a bass fishery. Just because I can get this lower, I can get it in that cooler water. And if I put this right in front of those bass, well, they're still going to see something like that as a tasty snack, and they're going to want to attack it. So again, summertime, bass fishing is all about those bass chasing bait. We need to make that adjustment. We need to work accordingly. And a spinnerbait gives us that versatility. It gives us the ability to work our baits, to change up things and work for a variety of different situations. We work it ourselves. We change the color, we change the pattern, we change the blades. But for the most part, we work that bait how we need to work it in the water. Nice and slow, get it low, nice and fast, get it to rise. And those can be the things that can really trigger those hard baits, because a lot of guys are not throwing a spinnerbait during the summertime. So you always want to show those bass something different. So there you have it, the humble spinnerbait. They may not be fancy, but they sure are flashy. And a lot of times it can be just the thing to get you those hard bites when those bass are chasing bait during the summer. Tie one on, give it a try. I really think you'll be pleased with the results. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.